Hello, everybody. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. My name is Brandon Adams, still here at home for right now. And, of course, when you watch the show in the background, you see my kitchen, my laundry room, things like that. I will tell you that the kitchen area over here is a great source of stress for my wife, who keeps a lovely home for us here. But anytime there's any kind of like dirty dishes or anything in the kitchen, she's always very nervous that it's going to be shown on camera and then she'll be judged by the audience. I've told her that she doesn't have to worry about that. We don't have a judgmental audience, at least not judgmental of her. They're plenty judgmental of me. Plus, everything looks great, as per always. We're glad to have you with us. It's Connor Riley here coming up in just a moment. But I also want to show you a couple of things off the top, because I'll get more into this with Connor and talk to you about this in our comment section. There is something that I think is a very real concern for Georgia. Not more of a concern for Georgia than it is for other teams. It's just a reality facing the sport with the uncertain offseason that we've had, players far away from campus, far away from really much level of accountability, different levels of access to offseason training. That's just an issue that all programs are going to deal with. I think Kirby Smart and the other big-time coaches in college football are all aware of this, and to a degree, all concerned with how it's going to impact their program. However, there were a couple of videos that I saw this week involving some Georgia players that brought to mind the fact that for at least a few of the top UGA names, their ability to train during the offseason might be better than some of their counterparts around college football. There was a video that many of you have seen. It's been shared on the internet a good bit of Jamari Salyer, the potential bedrock of the 2020 offensive line. He's putting in work, and right there alongside him, the number 4 pick in the NFL draft, Andrew Thomas. Obviously, they were high school teammates at Pace Academy, really good friends together, doing some off-season training together there as well. And, you know, I think that you can't overstate this, that when you're a guy like Salyer looking to come into your own this year in college football, as I said before, one of the potential key leaders for Georgia offensive line and potentially the most effective lineman in the group, the fact that you're doing some offseason training with a good friend like Thomas, who put together as good a college career as can be put together, I think there's some value to that. And you add to that a video that was recently shared and got a lot of attention. I think Mike Griffith even wrote about this at DawgNation.com, of James Cook. Kind of a well-done, you know, real spicy edits, a good-looking video. But in checking out the Cook timeline on this, I saw another picture of James working with his brother Dalvin Cook, who obviously was a great college running back at Florida State and a very good NFL running back with the Minnesota Vikings. In much the same way that I think that Jamari Salyer probably benefits from getting a chance to do some offseason workout with a guy like Andrew Thomas, James Cook leaning on his brother Dalvin Cook as James gets ready for what could be a pivotal season for him here at Georgia. I think there's some value in that there as well. So off-season training for players far removed from their campus, a little bit different for each player involved. But in the case of a couple high-profile examples for Georgia, they've got some pretty good partners to help them out. We'll talk to Connor Riley more about that in a moment. Speaking of a partner, you need to have one on your side if you find yourself dealing with a divorce. And the fact of the matter is that's a reality that many people in our audience are facing. I don't like saying that it's an unfortunate fact, but it is nonetheless true. Statistically speaking, a lot of you have either dealt with this in the past or may find yourself dealing with this in the future. And if you find yourself going through those circumstances, the best thing you can do is put a smart advocate on your side, a tough fighter on your behalf there as well, to help you rebuild your finances, help you reform the relationship with your family in some cases, and just educate you about the process. After all, this may be the first time that you've gone through this, but our friends at Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce, they've been through this thousands of times. That learned, earned experience from all the times in which they've dealt with this before can be put to use for you. And they'll take a lot of the steps for you along the way to get you back where you need to be. But the first step belongs to you. Reach out to them, find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. The website, once again, is theatlantadivorceteam.com. It'll get you in touch with the Merriweather and Tharp. You can see all kinds of free resources, you know, podcasts, blog posts, just things to help educate you about the process and, frankly, set you up to ask better questions when you do that first free initial consultation with our friends there. So find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. Now, with all of that out of the way, we'll get ready to say hello to Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp this morning. Connor's got a great piece up at DawgNation.com looking at Georgia quarterback Jamie Newman and what professional troll Danny Cannell recently said about him. I think that Connor brings up some good points on that, so that's where I want to begin our conversation today. But first, Connor, I'll say thanks for being with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Hope you're doing well today.
Yep, BA. Thanks for having me on. As always, it is a pleasure.
So I read your Good Day UGA piece this morning on Jamie Newman and the skepticism that Danny Kanell showed of him. And I said this on my show yesterday that, A, I don't hate Kanell as bad as some people probably assume that I do, because I think that shtick is kind of funny, and Kanell's clearly got a shtick that's working for him. I don't think he's employed without it. So from that standpoint, the anti-SEC thing has worked out pretty well from him. And specifically speaking, I do think it's fair to be skeptical of the impact that Newman can make at Georgia. I thought you made a good case for that, at least worth UGA fans considering. So I'll give you the floor to kind of explain some of it. Of course, I want people to read your story, but a little thumbnail sketch if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think it's either like The Onion or Clickhole. There's a fake comedy headline out there that's the worst guy makes an actually good point, and it's sort of devastating. And that's kind of where it is with Kanell, because obviously I think a lot of SEC fans just sort of tune out Kanell anytime he says something, because he does have a certain anti-SEC bias as a part of his shtick, which I think has been very successful for him. But the things he said about Jamie Newman, he wasn't critical of Newman or saying he's a bad player or anything along those lines. He just said, I want to see it from this Georgia offense, and I want to see it from Jamie Newman. I don't think any Georgia fan is realistically expecting Newman to be Burrow 2.0, but there are some pretty high expectations on Newman, and we only really have to go back and look at last year, where there was a new offense came in. We all gave them sort of the benefit of the doubt, and the reality is that they just did not deserve that, given the losses that they had sustained at the wide receiver position and what turned out to be a pretty subpar season from that Georgia offense. So, as much as you see Jamie Newman at the top of NFL draft boards and near the top of the Heisman odds, I think we're all right to have some skepticism about what he'll be at Georgia this season.
Yeah, so here's what I've said about this, and admittedly, I have no idea if Jamie Newman will be first-round pick good. It is fair to say he was getting some draft love, even when he was still a Wake Forest quarterback. So it's not necessarily a Johnny-come-lately point to say NFL scouts may like him, but I don't know if he'll be as good as these first-round projections suggest that he could be, or the betting market that has him near the top of the list of the Heisman Trophy. I don't know that he'll be that good either. I assume that it's impossible to be as good at Georgia as Joe Burrow was for LSU, just because of how Ruthian the season that Joe Burrow put together last year. That may not even be a possibility. But here, as a Georgia fan, is what I'm very comfortable saying. In fact, I think I've told you this before. If you give me the choice of all the available transfer quarterbacks, I think Newman would have been the one I would have picked. And I guess KJ Costello was probably rated higher on the 24/7 Sports transfer, rating list than Newman was. But frankly, Costello's a little bit of what Georgia's had in the past. I'm kind of excited about Georgia having something a little bit different. I think I'll take Newman over Costello because of that. When I was touting for Derek King, the honest truth is I didn't know a lot about Jamie Newman. I've learned a lot more about him since then. I think I'm even okay with Newman over Derek King here at the moment. The other thing that I've said, Connor, is when you look at the current situation in the SEC, it's a good year to be uncertain at quarterback because LSU's in the same boat. I think that Alabama's in the same boat. Tennessee is probably even more uncertain at quarterback than Georgia is right now. The two established quarterbacks that Georgia plays, Kyle Trask and Bo Nix, I'm not trading Newman for either one of those guys. And frankly, the most established quarterback in the SEC is probably Kellen Mond, but I haven't seen enough from Mond that would make me say if I had the magical power to bring him to Georgia instead of Jamie Newman, I don't believe that I would do that either.
Right, and I think we've seen in recent college football seasons, sometimes having an unknown at the quarterback position is a very good thing. You think back to Kyler Murray at Oklahoma. You look at some of the other recent Heisman Trophy winners. A lot of those guys have sort of come out of nowhere and gone on to have huge seasons. Now, I've been pro Costello, and I think the unfortunate circumstances to lead Newman not getting a spring practice rep in, I think perhaps maybe dings him a little bit. But again, Newman has, other than maybe perhaps Bryce Young at Alabama this coming season, I think Newman has the highest upside, where if he's able to stay healthy, if George Pickens and Dominique Blaylock are healthy and build on solid freshman seasons, his ceiling is as high as any quarterback in the SEC. It's just a question of, can all the pieces around him, Newman included, sort of click and fit together to make sort of that potent enough Georgia offense that can complement what should be the best defense in the SEC for Georgia.
All right, final point for me on this topic, and I'm going to be an unabashed homer, 100 miles an hour fan here on this. But all of the stuff we're talking about here of justifiable skepticism of Newman, coupled with the growing level of hype surrounding Kyle Trask at Florida and expectations of the Gators on the field. Connor, if Georgia beats Florida this year, I believe it'll be the sweetest victory for Georgia in the series so far for Kirby Smart. And in fact, I'll go so far as to say this. I think that Kirby Smart can get Dan Mullen fired this year. Not at the end of this season, but the process. Hear me out on this. Not at the end of this season, but the process that leads to Dan Mullen being run out of a rail, is it out on a rail?
On a rail.
The process that leads to him being run out on a rail in Gainesville will begin this year. If Mullen, the offensive mastermind, with the returning quarterback, does not have a better offense than transfer from Wake Forest, offensive coordinator that Georgia plucked from the ranks of recently fired NFL guys, I think that Monken's is a big-time hire. But the truth is, a lot of Gators fans don't. If Georgia has the better offense, if Georgia has the better quarterback, at that point in time, what is there left to sell Dan Mullen on to Florida fans? The beginning of the end for Mullen in Gainesville could be this year if Newman outplays Trask.
See, this is why I love BA, because while some college football writers and thinkers are just trying to piece things together and get through this offseason, BA is still bringing you the 100-mile-an-hour A-plus takes here. I think you're right on with Mullen there. You know, this kind of if there's going to be a season, you have to show you can beat Georgia, and that's something Mullen has to do and has yet to show. This would seem to be the season to do it, just given the uncertainty on the Georgia offense. But you know, to your point with Mullen and Cannell's larger point that got everyone's attention, that Florida is the SEC East favorite. You know, they still have some questions, and while yes, quarterback isn't one of them, that game last year between Georgia and Florida was not as close as I think the final score had indicated. Florida never had a chance to take the lead or even tie the game with the ball in the second half of that contest. So, you know, to your larger point, one, the next victory over Florida is always going to be the sweetest victory in this rivalry.
That is probably true.
But I think your point on Mullen is very interesting, because I think there are already a lot of skeptics out there comparing him to Georgia and what he's doing with Kirby Smart. And if he loses this year, where, you know, I would say it's probably believed from a national media standpoint, Georgia and Florida are at least pretty close to equal footing. And if they lose again, you know, that's 3 straight losses to Smart with Mullen at Florida. And those Florida teams have all been top 10 teams. So you sort of wonder, all right, is this ever really going to happen for Mullen at Florida?
I think it's also fair to add the 2017 loss for Mississippi State at Georgia, because people forget Mississippi State was only a field goal underdog that day, and a lot of people believed at the time that Mississippi State also had the better quarterback with Nick Fitzgerald in comparison to the freshman Jake Fromm. So in terms of bad losses for Mullen against Smart, the trip to Athens in 2017 when he absolutely got ran out of the stadium, that wasn't a good look for Mullen either.
Right, and I actually think, you know, going into this game this year, obviously we have to see how the season plays out. That September 19th contest against Alabama will loom large, but, you know, I feel pretty comfortable saying Mullen's going to have more pressure on him in this game than Kirby Smart is, and that's pretty rare for the most part in just about every game that Smart has coached.
Let me move on and talk about something different, and I think we've probably been of the same mind on a topic. I wonder if you're evolving at the same pace that I am. The conversation we just had, who's going to win a game on the field, what does it mean for the players and coaches involved, that's the fun thing for me to do on this show, and that's for the most part what I've tried to do during the coronavirus lockdown. Every twist and turn of the who says football's coming back and who says it hasn't, I, for the most part, stayed away from that because I don't think it's fun for the audience, and I think a lot of it's very hodgepodgey and hard to figure out. However, Connor, are you like me to the point where it's getting more difficult to ignore this because we're getting close to the actual decision being made, whether it's made blanket across the country, piecemeal in different regions or different conferences? I find myself wanting to talk more about it on the show. I find myself paying a lot more close attention to the news itself. This is not theoretical anymore. We are coming up on the beginning of summer. We have some SEC programs seemingly, including Georgia, it would appear, on its way back to campus. Other parts of the country where that, as of now, is not happening. To me, this is getting harder to ignore and, frankly, becoming more important to talk about, even though the results of the conversation are frustrating for some because of how polarizing it can be. I find myself having a more difficult time ignoring it because we are now on the verge of announcements and decisions needing to be made. Do you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I've always sort of been I've had I'm going to pay attention to, what certain people are saying every day. Paul Feinbaum, I think has become, just because of the people has access to, has become, I think, a fairly important voice and sort of weather barometer on all of this. But I've also always sort of held the belief that we're going to have football in the fall because, one, there's just too much money to be lost, and two, as pessimistic as I can be sometimes, I choose to try and think on the positive side of things, and I don't necessarily want to think about what a fall without football would look like for many, many different reasons. And the thing I just keep coming back to is, to your larger point, like eventually we're reaching a point where decisions are going to have to be made. I know the NCAA last night continued to extend its dead period on recruiting. Honestly, I'm okay if they say no visits until September 1st, because that just sort of, no one's really, I think, rushing to go out and visit campuses in July, and they extended up to the end of June 30th, and they'll sort of see where they are there. And I think the important thing, and sort of from this point, I guess, today's May 14th to the next month from now, at some point in the next month, we're probably going to have an idea of when teams and athletes are going to come back to campus, if that's going to be a thing. And unfortunately, I think with what you're seeing going on in California, it might not necessarily be sort of a national blanket thing. It's probably going to be left up to you, hopefully at a conference level and potentially even a state level.
Yeah, here is what I think I'm comfortable saying. Georgia's playing football this year. They're going to have a season. Most of the teams that Georgia plays are also going to play football and have a season this year. What's not entirely clear to me is, does the season begin on time? And kind of what I told Mike Griffith yesterday is, obviously the Pac-12 is the place that would hold us up in terms of kicking off football, kind of that weekend that it typically kicks off. What I told Mike yesterday, and I'm curious if you agree with me on this, I think the Pac-12 has some leverage in getting the rest of college football to wait on them for a little bit, because I think ultimately the sport itself knows there's more money to be made as long as everyone in that playoff coalition is cooperative with each other. I think that the other conferences would want to be at least a little bit patient with the Pac-12 on that standpoint, at least a little bit. However, if the people within those states, California in particular, were to draw a stern, hard line in the sand, the leverage the Pac-12 has eventually is not infinite, and eventually the rest of the country would move on without them. Do you agree with me on this, that the Pac-12 would have some leverage potentially in convincing the rest of college football to hold off for a couple of weeks? Frankly, I hope that's not what happens. But I do think, because of the way the playoff coalition works together and the fact there are big votes for this body coming up in the years ahead on expanding the playoff and things like that, the Pac-12 may hold a little bit of leverage in terms of the season beginning at the very beginning of September, end of August, the way that it's supposed to.
So I actually think it's less the Pac-12 and it's more the state of California that sort of has that leverage. And obviously the 4 Power 5 teams in that state, USC, UCLA, Stanford, and Cal, I think those are the teams where those 4 teams are going to be the ones, and obviously the group of 5 teams as well. I think those are going to be the teams where if we're having to delay the start of the season because states are slow to rush back, and specifically California is slow to rush back, it'll be because of that state and sort of a delay for the rest of college football, because as it's been pointed out many times, USC and Alabama are supposed to play in Dallas on September 5th. That's a big game, I think, for both programs. I think both programs, obviously in an ideal situation, would want to play that game, but is Alabama going to rush out to try and find a last-minute, opponent of a similar marquee? Odds are they're probably not going to be able to find that. So I do think that, the Pac-12 and specifically California is sort of, I think, going to be where we see a season, whether it starts on time or whether it starts a few weeks delayed.
Let me make a quick final point on this, and I want to talk about one more thing before we let you go. You mentioned USC and USC and Alabama. I think it's very interesting that Crimson Tide Athletic Director Greg Byrne has now been asked multiple times about finding a replacement for USC, and he's operating under the assumption for now that game is still going to be played. I think that on the USC side of things, you hear very similar language coming out. I think that leaves the door open for the city of Los Angeles to eventually soften its stance on the lockdown that has in place here. The fact that they're still remaining at least publicly optimistic about this, I think leads me to believe that eventually what needs to happen in California is going to happen. My prediction is Alabama, USC, the rest of the week 1 games do get played. Maybe that's a prediction doomed to be wrong, but my prediction is we do have Week 1 football, including Cal playing TCU, USC playing Alabama. If I had to make a prediction right now, that's where I'm putting my money.
Yeah, and I think maybe an interesting thing to keep in mind there with USC is it is a private academic institution, so it is not beholden to the University of California school systems. And sort of, if they say, hey, online campus or classes are online, we don't necessarily want students congregating on campus, though. I think we've already clearly seen a sea change in this idea that you need to have students on campus for there to be the football games. Yeah. The Big 12 specifically has walked back a lot of the rhetoric on that. And I think even if schools decide that they're not going to be, or campuses decide they're not going to be open this fall, I would still, at this point, as maybe as foolish as this might be, to have football players and athletes on campus.
Let me squeeze this in before we let you go. I think it's really interesting. I talked about this before you joined us. Jamari Salyer getting a chance to work with Andrew Thomas. I think that Salyer is obviously one of the most pivotal members of this team for Georgia in 2020. I think the fact that he has someone like Thomas to lean on in training right now and in really following his footsteps, to me, Salyer reminds me a lot of what Isaiah Wynn was for Georgia in 2017. Remains to be seen if he's that good, but I think he's a pretty safe bet to have a really good season for Georgia, even if we think he's somewhat playing out of position. What are your thoughts on Salyer right now? He's kind of in the news because the video that he's been working on, a couple of his videos, have been passed around a little bit as of late. What do you think of Salyer right now?
My take has stayed the same on him. He might not be the best Georgia offensive lineman to start the season, just given, he's probably going to be at one of the tackle spots, and he is not taken a ton of reps there, specifically as many as, say, Justin Schaefer at left guard or Trey Hill at center or Ben Cleveland at the right guard spot. But by the end of the 2020 season, I believe that Salyer, whether it be a right or left tackle, and I think to start the season it's going to be at left tackle, he will be Georgia's best offensive lineman, and I don't necessarily think it'll be all that close. He showed major progress, and I actually think, while he only started one game in his 2019 season, I thought he had a very good year from doing all the little things that he needed to plug in and get better and earn playing time. And then working at a right tackle position that, quite frankly, I think when he enrolled at Georgia, no one thought he would play, even the most optimistic people about Salyer. And not only did he go out there and play it, when we saw him go out there in the Sugar Bowl against the best defense in the Big 12, led by Matt Rule, who's now the head coach of the Carolina Panthers, I thought Salyer had an excellent game that day and did a really great job filling in for Isaiah Wilson and talking with Thomas, Wilson, Kinley, at the NFL Combine. They all have sky-high expectations for Salyer, and I have no doubt that he's going to live up to those.
Final thing, I also mentioned James Cook before you joined us. Some kind of fun stuff out there with him as of late as well. I think it's fairly obvious that the previous Georgia offensive coordinator had no idea how to use Cook. Do you think that Todd Monken will have a better plan for a player that's admittedly quite interesting and yet also at times maybe not a perfect fit for the running back position? Does Monken have a plan for Cook, you think?
I think so. I think you look at last year with the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, he wasn't the play caller there, but I think over the second half of that season, he did I think a very good job of working in Kareem Hunt with Nick Chubb and sort of getting the most out of both those backs, even though they have a little bit different skill sets. And I think it's obviously pretty easy to see, Zamir White filling that Nick Chubb role, just given the physicality that he runs with. And I think Cook has the receiving skills that can sort of put him in that Hunt mode. And I do think that if Monken can sort of figure it out and get the pieces working, that he can have sort of a dual backfield to get the best out of both Zamir White and James Cook this coming fall.
Well, we feel like we've gotten the best out of you today, Connor. Thanks for spending some time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Thought. We appreciate that. Also here on this Thursday, I'll see you again this afternoon at 3 p.m. for Cover 4 Live, as you, me, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel all get together for some UGA talk. Looking forward to doing that with you at 3 p.m. this afternoon.
As always, it was a great time, BA.
Good stuff there. By the way, speaking of the DawgNation video channels, also a fun thing coming up today with Mike Griffith at noon. He's going to interview former Georgia coach Mark Richt, a terrific figure associated with the Georgia program. Should be a lot of fun with Mike at noon on the DawgNation video channels. I hope you'll check that out. Let me dive in and get a lot of your comments here today on both Facebook and YouTube. We can get into what I got into with Connor there. Football's eventual return. I do think this storyline is starting to really take shape. I thought it was very interesting that the Auburn president, I forget his name, but the president of the university, to me, he made the most forceful statement I've heard thus far in a message to incoming freshmen to his university saying, we will have football this season, and we will have a lot of the other, on-campus activities that students frankly expect when they go to an SEC school like Auburn. Pretty forceful statement there. Concurrent to that, you also had a pretty forceful statement as well from Jack Swarbrick recently, the Notre Dame athletic director, saying that they are not going to have capacity crowds in South Bend this year. So a lot of these opinions are becoming a little bit more grounded, a little bit more specific. And I do think this is a story worth watching. So we can talk about that. We can talk about the Newman stuff if you want to. My opinion on what it could mean for Dan Mullen if he doesn't build Kyle Trask into a big-time quarterback this year. And, of course, more on Cook and Salyer, the two names that I began the show with here today. So we can do a lot of that on our program. I'll head over here to YouTube first, and we'll get a lot of your comments there. Ryan Flanagan checking in as a Saints fan, and he's let us know that several times. So what else is going on? Daniel Aldrich says, thanks to Connor. Yeah, good stuff from Connor today. I always enjoy those conversations. Tristan West reminds us, and when it comes to Dan Mullen potentially being, knocked out of employment by Kirby Smart, he says, keep in mind, he's already done that to Jim McElwain, done that to Butch Jones. He says, who's next? I'd add Paul Johnson to that list there as well. So Kirby's been a little bit of a coach killer since being in Georgia. Stony Lid on the subject of NASCAR coming back, saying that means less Bama fans. Listen, I'm a NASCAR guy too, a little bit. So I'm looking forward to seeing racing again here coming up pretty soon. Jacob Thompson says USC is a private university. Can they play at neutral sites if they want? So, potentially, while they are private universities, they're not going to be impacted what some of the other public university systems are doing. For instance, the Cal State schools all have decided to go online campus for the upcoming fall semester. USC is a private school. They're not impacted by that. But in terms of a stay-at-home order, USC is a private institution is under the auspices of that the same way any other private business would be or private entity would be, churches, businesses, whatever else. So while the Cal State directive that came out about online classes for the upcoming year, that doesn't impact USC. The shelter-in-place restriction in Los Angeles being extended for now, that would impact them. And that's the thing that puts the potentially the Alabama-USC game in jeopardy. The fact that the football team at USC can't congregate in public because the current ordinance in Los Angeles won't allow for that. My prediction is eventually that's going to change. Eventually they will soften their stance on that. But obviously I've been wrong before. A couple of more YouTube comments. Jacob Thompson says Pac-12 isn't going to have an impact on college football whether they play or not. Oregon is good, but they still lose to Ohio State. In terms of qualifying for the playoff, I probably agree with you on that. I would say that, Oregon is pretty good this season. I think that USC may be better than they have been. From that standpoint, that's about it when it comes to, national attention for the Pac-12. But because these Power 5 conferences have cooperated with each other under the College Football Playoff Coalition, and because there are going to be votes upcoming about moving to an 18 playoff and some issues like that, I think trying to cooperate with the Pac-12 is going to be the first step. It's the same thing when you have somebody at work that you don't quite get along with. At first, you try to cooperate, you try to do the right thing, and at a certain point in time, you have to move on and do what's best for you. I think we'll see that here. I think if at all possible, college football will try to do the right thing on the part of the Pac-12 and be a little bit patient with them, but eventually they will move on without them because, as you said, you don't need California to do college football. California is becoming less and less relevant from a college football standpoint with each passing year. And by the way, if the sport does move on, seemingly without the Pac-12 this year, can you imagine the floodgates of transfers that could come along because of that? We've already had people in our comment section mentioning the idea of, well, let's go back after a Noah Sewell. Let's go get, a Justin Flo or there's all kinds of names that show up as wish list for Georgia fans in the event of that. So I think that's all. I think that's all really fun. All right, let's do a couple more on YouTube and we'll go to Facebook. Devin Glenn feels like Georgia can have the best defense in the country. You may be very well right about that. Talking about the collection of elite defensive backs that Georgia has in place right now. Yeah, boy, a lot to think about when it comes to that. Stony Litz says Trask is going to get the full treatment in terms of getting thrown around like Felipe Franks did in 2017. In a lot of ways, you're reading my mind on that, Stony, because one of the things I'm going to do more of on the podcast today, I guess eventually I may write about this so all of you can see it. It is amazing how similar what is being said about Trask, a returning starter at Florida this year, in terms of the offseason hype, It's amazing how similar those words are. Almost word for word carbon copies of the Trask praise. Very similar to the praise from Felipe Franks at the beginning of last season. It is very easy to forget this. A lot of people had talked themselves into Felipe Franks being Dan Mullen's guy a year ago. Mullen's got a returning starter at quarterback, and that's going to be magic in Gainesville. We know how it ended for Franks there at Florida. And the truth is, the entire escapade in terms of Franks being believed to be a savior for Florida was built on some pretty flimsy evidence. It is very interesting. I'm going to do more of a comparison of that on the podcast today. But, Stoney, you're right there with me on that. CB, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. On the subject of the beard, I appreciate that. Maybe I will keep that. I think the beard actually looks better on the screen than it probably does in real life, maybe. But listen, I'll appreciate that. Devin Glenn also said he doesn't want to see Dan Mullen go at Florida. He wants to see him stay there forever, which I can certainly understand where that's coming from. A couple of your Facebook comments here on the program today. Cody Taylor on the subject of recruiting says getting James Williams is more important than getting Tony Grimes because we're losing Richard LeCount at season's end. There's a fair argument to be made for that. I think that Williams has, this is going back for a couple of years for me, always been such an interesting player because he's just so different than what you expect. He's really tall, in other words. And, a really tall safety like that, a guy that, could potentially do more for you than just be a traditional safety because of the wingspan and, that's just a really interesting athletic profile. So I've been interested in Williams now going back for a long time. I also really like Grimes there as well, but I understand why people would especially tout for Williams because, every now and then there's a player within a position group who's just kind of a freak, a specimen within that group. And I think that's what Williams kind of represents in the safety class for 2021, which makes him a really important get. Jacob O'Neill says that he likes NASCAR, but dirt tracks where it's at. I've never been to a dirt track. I'd love to go at some point in time. I'd love to go see that at some point in time. Matt Talley excited about Lewis Seen. Yeah, Seen's one of those guys that, Georgia's deep now, right? The roster, it's tough to get on the field. But Seen, very quietly, he got a chance to play, I think really did well. He was one of those guys that always kind of had that look of, if you go back prior to his debut at Georgia and you talked about guys from that class of, the 2019 class of, well, who's likely to impress at Georgia? Who's likely to have a big career? At a certain point, everybody predicts everybody, but Seen was very commonly mentioned in discussions like that. Seen had gotten a lot of love prior to his arrival at Georgia. And I would say when he had a chance to play last season, he was as advertised. In terms of guys in a much bigger role this year than they were a season ago, that I feel the most confident you won't see much of a hiccup on, Seen would be one of those guys for me. I would be very surprised if he does not have a good season. With LeCount kind of in the elder statesman role that J.R. Reed was in a year ago, Seen in the role previously occupied by LeCount of the real energetic, athlete. I expect big things for Lewis Seen this season as well. Joel Moody says, anybody seen Mike Tyson's new video? I guess I saw a little bit of that. Yeah, pretty funny. I guess he and Holyfield both have been showing some training videos off lately. I don't know if that's a preview to a comeback for either guy or what, but I did see some of that. Matt Silver's asking about our topic to begin the show. I was talking about how some of the video you've seen lately of Jamari Salyer shows him working out with Andrew Thomas. Some of the stuff you've seen from James Cook shows him working out with his brother, Dalvin Cook, and big NFL names like that. Dalvin from the Minnesota Vikings, obviously Andrew Thomas, recent number 4 pick from the New York Giants. In a day and age in which you're not quite sure how some players' offseason training is going, the fact that there's certain players in the Georgia roster who seem to be able to lean on a lot of expertise. Some of these guys working with personal coaches like our buddy Terrence Edwards and others. Also an example of that. A lot of the Georgia players it would seem are in pretty good hands in terms of how they're managing their offseason workouts because of who they have to hold them accountable and who they have to push them. I would say that Salyer and Cook are both examples of that. And by the way, you're seeing that on your video there, well, a moment ago, too, thanks to our buddy Michael Carvel. Let's see what else. Matt Rugavina says we still need to do a preview day for some of these position groups like the safeties. I think that's a good idea. I think we'll probably do a little bit more of that. Phil Rogers, who lives down there on the Florida First Coast, says Gators here in Jacksonville are overlooking us. Had one tell me yesterday we should not even come to October because we're going to lose too much. That's pretty funny. Good to know they're looking forward to it. Just makes the win that much more sweet, I guess. John Benton on the subject of some of the older folks around college football. That should be interesting to see. Jacob O'Neill says he got people talking dirt track racing in here. Sure enough, Jacob, I've always wanted to go to a dirt track race. I've just never been to one. I'd love to do that. I grew up close to Lanier Raceway in Gainesville. I never went there. That's not dirt track. That was asphalt. But one of those classic old school small dirt tracks, I'd love to do that at some point in time. Van West says, this is pretty funny. He says, dirt is for racing. Asphalt is for getting there. That's pretty fun. I like that. That's pretty good. Margaret Brooks says, I flew to Eldora dirt track with Bill Elliott to see a race. What fun. I promise we're not talking about racing forever here. But Eldora is kind of like that's like the Rose Bowl of dirt tracks. I mean, that's like the venue for dirt track racing. And to fly there with Awesome Bill from Dawsonville makes it that much better. By the way, Bill Elliott's son, Chase Elliott, huge UGA fan. That's pretty good stuff. Pretty good stuff. Chad Buchanan says he can't wait to see Kenny McIntosh's progress this year. I've said it before that when McIntosh made his debut last season, by the time we got a chance to see him, not by the time he played fairly early in the year, but he was more athletic than I expected him to be. I'm talking about from some of the stuff that I saw, brief windows during practice, early games during the season. McIntosh just came across as, he'd been sold to us as kind of a big, bruising, short yardage, goal line type running back. The truth is, when you see him play, some ability to catch the football, some nice footwork. The truth is, he kind of looks like just any other Georgia running back in a lot of ways. So I think the excitement about seeing a little bit more of Kenny McIntosh this year is justified. I'd probably take Milton ahead of him in terms of total rushing yards for the season. My pecking order would go Zamir 1, Kendall Milton 2, McIntosh in competition to be that key number 3. And at Georgia, that third running back has mattered in a lot of these years under Kirby Smart. So that's not necessarily a bad thing to be third running back there. But yeah, seeing more of McIntosh, kind of interesting. Phil Rogers also asked a good question. In July, who comes to media days with Kirby Smart? I would say that Richard LeCount's almost for sure going to be one of those guys. I would say there's a very good chance that Jamari Salyer gets that nod as well. Salyer may be a little bit of a reach, but I'd say he probably gets that nod as a symbol that he's expected to be a leader amongst the offensive line. Trey Hill, not a big talker necessarily, so you could see him staying away. They'd probably hold Ben Cleveland out on that for now. I could see Salyer being the representative there. Would they bring Jamie Newman? We've seen a lot more quarterbacks go in recent years than in the past. But this kind of goes back to the debate I've had with some of y'all. A lot of you have gotten mad when I say this. If it were me, I'd treat Newman like the starting quarterback because you don't have enough practice reps to have a full-fledged competition anyway. So just go ahead and treat him like the starter. If it were me, I'd bring Jamie Newman. Something tells me Georgia probably won't. They may not, make Newman available really at any point in time prior to the start of the season. So if I was saying safe bets, I'd say it's LeCount. I'd say it's Salyer. There'll be one more. Who do y'all think? I'm probably missing I guess Monty Rice, right? Salyer, Rice, LeCount. That's my 3. I'm basing that on who's kind of viewed to be a spokesman for the team. Obviously, key leader matters here. If I'm guessing, I'm saying Salyer, Rice, LeCount. They don't necessarily go by the 3 best players in the team because sometimes some of your best players aren't necessarily your most accomplished talkers. So you have to think about those things in relation there. I'll go Salyer, Rice, LeCount. Tell me what you think. Dante Green says he's going to take McIntosh over Milton because of the experience. Could be. Marshall Fleming with some nice words for Dejon Edwards. You love the thought of that. I love where Edwards came out of. I love that. I love that area down Colquitt County there. It's a great region for high school football. There's probably no region in the country that better prepares you for SEC football once you get down there in deep South Georgia. So So I'm excited about that possibility. And by the way, we'll roll into our R.S. Andrews cool down here, and I'll remind you, R.S. Andrews can get you covered for your air conditioning, your heating, your plumbing, your electric needs. They'll take care of all that for you, including as we're heading into some really hot weather in the days ahead. R.S. Andrews definitely got you covered on that front. Get your air conditioning system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. Dari and the whole team over there will take good care of you. In fact, they'll deliver you a smile because story after story, they've been delivering smiles for folks for a real long time. Bobby Bryan, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Lynn Johnson Shipman does bring a pretty good point. Eric Stokes would be in competition to be there. That's a pretty good point. Yeah, Lynn, I think you got a really good point. Eric is a really good talker, and to listen to Eric Stokes talk is to become an even bigger fan of his. He's just got a good perspective, and he's got a good personality. Stokes is a strong candidate. I think you're right. I don't know if that means that Stokes replaces LeCount necessarily. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But Stokes would be a good one to bring. Chad Buchanan says, nice manscaping. Yeah, I'm trying to keep the beard. Honestly, about the only reason why I would consider getting rid of the beard right now is the whole keeping it trimmed and shaped is really, frankly, pretty hard. It's much easier to take a razor and just sort of shave your whole face. The trimming of the beard is probably a little harder than I expected it to be, but I appreciate the kind of words on that. Phil Rogers says Trinity Christian here in Jacksonville's got some good defensive backs. Yeah, Trinity's one of the top programs, certainly in the state of Florida. Joel Moody says, my AC just kicked on as the cool down began. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so necessarily. I don't think so. It's good to know yours is working well. Jarvis Hannah checking out. Jarvis, appreciate you being here. We're going to check out ourselves in a couple of minutes. Let's get ready to go right now with a couple more YouTubes before we get there. UGA Football says Eric Stokes showing some love to his brother on social media. Yeah, you'd love to see that. James Wade and Bank 6 talking about George Pickens here. Jay Shipes, some funny stuff. Also says we're doing well in terms of our YouTube signal. I'm glad to know that. Happy to know that. UGA Football on here also talking about Jay Camarda. I think Camarda is interesting, both in terms of I do expect a big year from him punting. And I guess I kind of wonder, is there a chance that Camarda gets involved in a place-kicking competition too? I'm interested in that. Andrikas Lindley, I hope I pronounced your first name correctly, and James Wade, both mentioning Monty Rice as a media day rep for Georgia. I think y'all are both probably right about that. I think that he may be – Monty's another one of these guys that you believe everything he says. And when he's talking, he's got such a honest way of speaking that it just comes across as the most earnest thing you've ever heard. And no matter what he said, you'd believe it because of the way that he says it. So that makes him a really good spokesman and rep for Georgia. I think he'd be there. I think the point on Facebook about Stokes is a pretty good one. You're going to have somebody from offense, and I would say that Salyer's probably the best, most likely candidate over there. Couple more. Tristan West says Newman because of the quarterback. Yeah, I think that goes against Kirby a little bit. He did take Fromm last year because Fromm was clearly the quarterback. But for the most part, Kirby seemingly tries to avoid stuff like that. Bank 6 says you gotta have the kicking game squared away so you can neutralize guys like Jalen Waddle. Yeah, Waddle's one of those guys that he is among the best players in the SEC, but in terms of the degree to which he has to be game planned against, I don't know that any individual player probably has more defensive coaches spending more time game planning against him, in your case also special teams as well. He's just so fast. And even in 2018, when Alabama had a number of receivers who were probably thought of better than Waddle, I think that Waddle was probably the individual player on that team that scared me the most. And you just got to be aware of him. And he had a big game against Georgia in 2018. Lee Godwin's, or I should say Godowns, also likes the dirt track stuff. I'm glad to see that. Light Dog 1968 there as well. He says they're really loud too. Yeah, I would imagine so. The regular NASCAR races, the big Cup Series races, I love the noise, but they are so loud, so loud. Jay Shipes with the recommendation. I believe, didn't Adam Carolla do that, Doc J? I think that may be right. Frank Patterson says, statistically, you could argue that Ben Cleveland will be our best lineman this year. Yeah, I'm still high on Cleveland. I'm not moving. I mean, I think the competition in the interior of the offensive line is intense because of how well Georgia's recruited there. But I'm not done with Cleveland by a long shot. I'm really glad he's coming back, and I have high expectations for him. I think that's probably fair. All right, y'all, we got to get ready to go. I'm trying to think if there's anything we want to do here. Or we got to get ready to go. A lot of good comments. I wish we had time to get them all, but I want to get ready to wrap up. As I said before, it's Mike with Mark Rickett at noon today. We'll have cover 4, 3 p.m. So busy afternoon of the DawgNation video channels. I hope that you will check out all of that. And we appreciate you being here. We appreciate the R.S. Andrews folks making it all possible here in terms of our R.S. Andrews cool down. Big thanks to them. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust them to do all that for you. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Huge thanks to Meriwether and Tharp for making DawgNation Daily possible. We could not do this show without the support of great sponsors. And I truly think of them as friends. Bob, Jason, the whole team over there at Meriwether and Tharp. Not only do I love their partnership with DawgNation, I love the work they do with people who find themselves dealing with a really tough situation. It's why I proudly say that Meriwether and Tharp is the presenting sponsor of DawgNation Daily today. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That'll get you in touch with Meriwether and Tharp. And while you're on the internet, make sure to check out ajc.com as well. As I said to Connor, we avoid anything that has the whiff of politics on this show. But in terms of following the actual news and the coronavirus, that is the leading indicator for how sports are going to play out. So far, so good. The news in Georgia, with its measured incremental return, would seem to be good so far. And I think it's important that news continues to be good. You can obviously follow that and see how it's going at ajc.com. Get all your Atlanta news now. Sports stuff there as well. Just keep up with everything going on in your city, your state. Right there, ajc.com, Atlanta News Now at ajc.com. In fact, before I get ready to say goodbye to you, let me give you a little bit of a tip about a couple of things that are on the site here today. As we kind of head back towards the start of the school system, also some news on some of the early voting stuff coming up. Obviously, COVID-19 impacts that. You can catch up with all of that. And we are on the verge of a lot more information about what it might look like and when it might be that high school sports can return. You can get some very interesting news on that at ajc.com as well. Atlanta News Now at ajc.com. One final thing, the best for last. As our buddy Eddie would want us to know, it's now been 1,293 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. It's our Gator Hater Updater. I love to be able to share that with you. And it's going to be a long, long time, I believe, before Florida has anything to celebrate against UGA. And that's a great way to close things out today. Podcast edition of our show with even more on these topics will be available for you in just a little bit. But for video, I'll say goodbye to you for now. See you back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Have a great day, everybody.